Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and as you can see, my colleague and partner Peter Lavelle is indisposed, so it will be just me today. So I'm sorry for you, just who only have to tolerate me, but I will do my best. And as I have said many times before, it is the avowed policy of the Gaggle that come rain, come shine, in sickness, in health, even beyond the grave, we will always be here providing whatever service we provide to fellow gagglers. And even I am not above the Gaggle policy. So here it is. Anyway, there's a lot of serious stuff to talk about, and we're obviously going to talk about that during this session. But I want to start off with something more, I guess, lighthearted. Nice to see, by the way, some of our friends here, Herman Montoya, Andy Carmen. Thanks very much for joining us. I've been thinking about doing a Gaggle film club. Haven't done one for a while. I've been meaning to do so, but I've been a little remiss. And I want to do it on a film from the 1980s. I don't know how many people remember it. The film's called Absence of Malice. It starred Paul Newman and Sally Field. I'm no great fan of Sally Field. She's quite a good actress, but she's rather annoying. I mean, I think it's one of those things. I mean, there are certain actresses people really love, but I just find them annoying, and that's really the problem. The good thing about Absence of Malice is the character that Sally Field plays is herself rather annoying, so it's a good fit. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to do Absence of Malice is that it's a relatively recent film. I think it's the early 1980s, maybe 1981 or so. That was had a very unfavorable view of journalists, and I thought, okay, well, we had the whole nonsense of Woodward and Bernstein, the worship of journalism in the aftermath of Watergate, and as I've said before, in some Gaggle podcast, Woodward and Bernstein. Sorry, somebody's asked. Johnny Bunt asked, George, why is the door behind you always ajar exactly at the same angle? I don't know. It's not done deliberately, but I guess it happens. Anyway, I just continue with what I was saying, that Woodward and Bernstein received a ridiculous amount of praise for their coverage of Watergate. It was wholly undeserved. They didn't really play much of a role in the unraveling of what conspiracy there was, and really in the end the conspiracy itself, we found out very little about. I mean, as to why these men broke into the Watergate building, what they were hoping to get there, who exactly hired them, and for what purpose. I mean, we never really found out much about that. Most of Watergate was about the cover-up, which was very tedious because that's what government officials do. They think about their legal liability, and they try and minimize their legal liability, often very unsuccessfully. And I think that's what most of Watergate was about. But anyway, Woodward and Bernstein really played a very minor role in all of this. But they received all the accolades, and then there was, of course, even a movie made based on the Woodward and Bernstein book that they published, All the President's Men, and I think it won all sorts of awards. It had Robert Redford in it, handsome Redford as the Bob Woodward character, and then you had Dustin Hoffman as the Carl Bernstein character. There's I was enormous acclaim to the film. It was made by Alan Pakula, who's a big shot film director, and it coincided with a big enthusiastic entrance into journalism school. Everyone wanted to be the next Woodward and Bernstein, bring down the next president, and so on. None of that ever materialized. And the rubbishy books that Woodward and Bernstein have written since then, it reflects that their reputation was always wildly overstated. But in any case, what was interesting about Absence of Malice was that the film had to have been made about maybe 5-6 years after All the President's Men, and it was a very unfavorable view of journalism. I won't go into too much detail as to the plot, but basically, the Sally Field character, who's a reporter, is used by the district attorney as in order to apply pressure against a kind of a local businessman who was believed to have a gangster connection. They didn't really have any real evidence that an alcohol wholesale. He was information to the Sally Field character in order to apply pressure against him. The information, I said, is that he is a person of interest to the district attorney's office involved in the disappearance of a union leader. So that's it. They published that. He's a person of interest. And that, of course, was an absolute disaster for the businessman, the Paul Newman character. And he tried what the purpose was. And of course, Sally Field, journalism, First Amendment, I'm not going to disclose my my sources, and so that was the thing. I mean, the point why this was was a hostile to journalism. I mean, it has the ironic title "Absence of Malice." So, in other words, journalists can write any nonsense the journalist likes, as long as there's an absence of malice. That's all that matters. As long as there's no malice involved, she can actually destroy, he or she can actually destroy a person's reputation, because that person has an agenda, as in the case of the district attorney who was under. And so he thought, well, how am I going to crack this case? I'm going to apply pressure against this local businessman by leaking something that was really totally dishonest. I mean, they had no evidence whatsoever linking the businessman to the union leader's disappearance. Anyway, it's a very negative view of journalism that basically they just allow themselves to be used by powerful forces, in this case, the district attorney's office, and then they hide behind the First Amendment, journalistic freedom, protecting our sources and so on. But in the meantime, they're actually destroying reputation. They're not actually advancing truth or advancing knowledge about the miscreants in government. They're just pushing the agenda of powerful individuals. So that, I think that's a very fair view of journalism, and I was thinking, well, okay, that was it's a negative view. It was certainly a reaction that had set in against the cult of Woodward and Bernstein. But then I thought about it, that really most movies, other than All the President's Men, have been negative about journalists. I mean, it's really the Woodward-Bernstein thing was really an exception and by no means the rule, because of course, if you look at the greatest film of them all, by year after year, by universal acclaim, #1 American film of all time, Citizen Kane. And of course, those who have seen Citizen Kane will know that at the center of it is a figure of Charles Foster Kane, loosely based on William Randolph Hearst, who was a publisher. But the point about Kane was that he was using his media empire in not, as he pretended, well, he's a muckraker, he's exposing the villainy of businessmen, the villainy of industrialists, the villainy of a corrupt government. He was using it in order to advance his political career. He was going to make a leap from governor of New York, going straight to the White House. And then when, of course, as people have seen the film will know, I mean, that big career leap to the White House didn't materialize. He then used his media empire to promote the singing career of his second wife, his much younger second wife. So it was a very cynical view of newspapers. The newspapers are there in order to promote the agendas of powerful individuals. And I think that's what media are. They're mouthpieces of powerful corporations. I mean, it used to be individuals, but now we're talking about giant corporations. So when you had the big newspaper proprietors, such as Hearst, but now essentially it's all these huge multinational corporations. Anyway, so that's the greatest of them all. And then, of course, we have films such as The Front Page. Then there have been, I think, 3 versions of that. Again, very negative view of the journalists are just grubby individual. That didn't really deal with the, corrupt, powerful forces using newspapers for their own ends. I mean, it was basically showed journalists to be very corrupt people who, basically, poking their noses into people's private lives and writing, sort of sleazy, articles, not really advancing any particular the public good. So that was the Front Page, and then probably the most negative of the movies about journalism was a very fine film from the early 1950s, starring Kirk Douglas, Ace in the Hole, where a journalist essentially colludes with a local sheriff in order to keep somebody who there'd been a mining collapse and somebody was stuck in the mine, but he colludes with the local sheriff to keep this person stuck in the mine because he has an in and he can just turn out these great moving human stories day after day. And he will have a scoop on all his competitors. No one else will be able to produce it. And then, of course, the sheriff, who will finally rescue this unfortunate person stuck in the mine, will be re-elected, and they'll all basically do live happily ever after. Of course, again, it doesn't materialize, but it shows again what an unscrupulous, monstrous person this journalist is. That just for his own career, turning out this fine copy, he's colludes in keeping somebody stuck in the mine. So that's Ace in the Hole. And then, of course, there is a Network, which was made in the late 1970s, which is again, a very negative view of network television and how again they exploit Howard Beale, who obviously has a nervous breakdown, but they market this person who's suffering serious mental collapse. They market him as if he's some great mystic with visions of the world. He's a religious teacher who's who's able to see further than anyone else. So again, very, very negative view of journalism. So what I was kind of thinking about that really the Woodward-Bernstein thing is entirely a fluke. It was based on taking Woodward and Bernstein at their own valuation, as if somehow these two intrepid reporters were doing all this, legwork, and they exposed the villainy and corruption at the heart of the Nixon administration. There was nothing of the sort, and the film, which made them into heroes, was really was really ridiculous. And so if you look at most other Hollywood movies and and books and so on, I think is a much more negative view of journalism, and I think that's justifiable. I mean, everything that we've witnessed during the past few years, longer than that, we basically should have a negative view of journalism when we're thinking about whether it's the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, whether it's the nonsense of the Russiagate hoax, whether it's recently the way they've cast the Kyle Rittenhouse case, whether it's the story of the bounties, the Russian bounties on American servicemen in Afghanistan. These are all ridiculous stories peddled by the media in the service of powerful interests. In this case, the powerful interests were those of the intelligence security apparat, and they use reporters to feed all sorts of information for which the reporters have absolutely no basis for independent confirmation. So they just rely entirely on what well, we have first-rate intelligence. We have intelligence about Putin's discussions with his key advisors, and we're having it now with these absurd stories that the media are peddling about a supposed imminent invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So somebody says, Stephen Lackwell says, can't remember the name, but there was a film about a fake ordinary man during the Depression. I think, Stephen, you're thinking about Meet John Doe. And that's a good example, because Meet John Doe was indeed a kind of a powerful newspaper publisher, had created this fictional figure of John Doe, who had apparently threatened to commit suicide, but the newspaper, and in the figure of the rather talented reporter played by Barbara Stanwyck, they decide to manipulate this person John Doe in order to have him write these articles in which, no, I'm not going to commit suicide. I now see the goodness in everybody. And so he starts writing these, apparently he himself is writing these columns and appearing on radio, giving these radio broadcasts, talking about how there may be a Great Depression, but people are basically good. And this, he now becomes this, national figure. It is John Doe, and there are these John Doe clubs formed throughout America. This person, he was going to commit suicide because of this terrible misery that he was suffering during the Great Depression, but instead he hasn't done so. He's chosen to help others, to say how wonderful life is and how wonderful people are. And of course, the reporter, the Barbara Stanwyck character, she kind of falls in love with him. But what she doesn't really realize is, she does realize it, but she doesn't think about it, is, of course, she's being manipulated by this powerful newspaper publisher He's played by Edward Arnold, who people people are aficionados of old movies like I am will know him. He often plays villains, but not always. He's kind of a big, portly man. Here, he wears these very small glasses, which make him a little more sinister because he tends to clean his glasses, and every time he cleans them, it actually makes him rather rather a dark figure. I mean, the sort of the small rimless glasses we always associate with Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS. So it's always kind of course, this film was made before Heinrich Himmler, but always there's something bad about small rimless glasses. But he plays a very villainous character, and he apparently even has kind of stormtroopers, his own private army that he's training. So it's very much a kind of a negative picture that he uses John Doe in order to advance his political career, just as he uses his newspapers to advance his political career. Clearly, he's planning like Charles Foster Kane, a political leap to the presidency. So yeah, that's a very good example. Meet John Doe. Anyway, to go back to what I was saying about how the media tell all these ridiculous stories. So we had Russiagate, and we have all the rest of it, and even now, incidentally, Russiagate has by no means gone away. The media is still trying to rehabilitate themselves by pretending that, well, it wasn't all a hoax. There was a lot of truth in there, and so the way it's done is they forget everything that all their faith in Mueller, in the Mueller report, and instead they've now switched over to that I don't know, 10-volume or whatever Senate intelligence report. But the point is that, and there's a very interesting, well, not a very interesting, but instructive article about all of this in the Atlantic this month by David Frum. Everyone, people should remember David Frum was one of the chief purveyors of the weapons of mass destruction hoax leading up to the US invasion of Iraq. And of course, needless to say, he was also in the forefront of the Russiagate hoax, which is itself interesting how the same cast of characters, they move from one hoax to another hoax. And that goes also for all the neoconservatives, all the Stephen Hayes and Jonah Goldberg. You may have read about them this week, that they resigned as Fox News contributors, but of course, as it turned out, they kind of they resigned just ahead of the the sheriff with the rope. In other words, it was about to get fired by Fox News because they were contributors, but basically no one was using them other than Brett Baer and I guess Chris Wallace. But Brett Baer and Chris Wallace, they're hardly that popular at Fox News. So again, in this article by Frum, he regurgitates every single cliche in the book about Russiagate. Or everything else. Everything you remember. Oh yeah, the Trump Tower meeting with that Russian lawyer. Natalia Veselnitskaya. Oh, and then there was, of course, Carter Page. He went to give a lecture in Moscow, and then you just wheel every single one out and said, "Hey, how can you say it's a hoax when I've listed, all of these items?" This is known as a total crock, because everyone knows who has ever done mathematics. 20 times nothing is nothing. 100 times nothing is nothing. You can pile on every kind of nonsensical allegation and say, hey, look, I've come up with 50 different issues involving Trump and Russia, so there must be some truth to this story. No, every single one of those is completely nonsensical. There was never anything in that, whether it's the Veselnitskaya, wangling a meeting in Trump Tower, or whether it was vague plans on the part of Trump that he never pursued to build a tower in Moscow. I mean, I think as Stephen Cohen, the late Stephen Cohen, I mean, once said, I mean, you know, of all the people, you know, the rich people in America who tried to drum up business in Russia, Trump was actually the least successful and the least interested. I mean, there were so many rich people in America who thought that, hey, you know, Russia is a kind of El Dorado. There must be a lot of money here. I mean, it's a big country. You know, there's wealthy people here. You know, why don't I invest in and try and make some money? Trump was actually one of the ones who actually never really pursued it. So anyway, but the point is that what Fromm is doing here is what so many in the media are doing, which is, you know, you just keep piling on all these little details, and you think that you will persuade somebody that this is a serious story. And then, of course, they don't really quote from Mueller, and Mueller's report was you know, a lot of it was completely ridiculous. And again, he had access to all kinds of intelligence. You know, he had access to FBI, he had access to CIA's material. But most of what Mueller wrote in his report, you can look it up. You know, it's online, and the thing was based on journalism. It's what reporters reported. So it's like, and reporters themselves just simply reported what somebody else reported. So it all became just like a, I got the famous telephone game, you know, where you just whisper something and then you whisper and it's in. But, and again, because people keep repeating what somebody else said, it seems like this is substantial, you know, this is something serious going on here. And Mueller, most of what Mueller alleged in that report of his was based on journalism, what reporters reported. But even he couldn't come up with any evidence for the Trump-Russia collusion. He couldn't come up with anything. I mean, he made the allegation, you know, about WikiLeaks obtained the DNC files from Russian intelligence, that Russian intelligence hacked into the DNC, and they passed on this information to WikiLeaks. Now, the point was, then, you know, this is something that, I mean, I think somebody has already mentioned Aaron Mate, and of course, you know, Julian Assange certainly has denied that it came from a Russian government source. But again, if Mueller had really been serious about wanting to get to the bottom of the Russian hacking and the Russian, Russians apparently trying to influence the election in Donald Trump's favor, then your first port of call should be Julian Assange. Ask Julian Assange. He's going to help you. I mean, you know, they made no attempt to get in touch with Julian Assange. At that time, Assange was still in the holed up in the Ecuador embassy, so they could always ask him, and then I'll see what he says about you know, as to where he got this information. But Mueller never did that. Mueller never pursued that any more than Mueller ever pursued all the other ridiculous leads, like, you know, Joseph Mifsud, that strange kind of hustler who apparently met another hustler, George Papadopoulos, and they kind of, you know, blathered on about, you know, organizing some sort of a conference, or Papadopoulos wanted to arrange a meeting between Trump, the candidate Trump, and Putin, as if, you know, a young campaign worker, he was in any position to arrange a meeting between Trump and Putin, and whether even Putin would have any interest in meeting a candidate, or Trump would have any interest in meeting Putin, and thereby allowing everyone to attack him as being in cahoots with Putin. So, but again, you know, Mueller went on at length about this without any real evidence for any of that. And so this was how it went on. I mean, it's like, again, or we have the famous Konstantin Kilimnik. Now, Konstantin Kilimnik, which again, people only Russiagate aficionados know what that name is. I mean, he was the person who worked for Paul Manafort as his interpreter in Ukraine. I mean, you know, Kilimnik was kind of gifted in languages, knew Russian and Ukrainian and English, obviously, well. So he worked for Manafort, and Manafort had worked years before he joined the Trump campaign. He had worked for Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. And of course, and as we've talked before, Manafort had been urging Yanukovych the very policy that would be antithetical to Russia's interest, because Yanukovych to kind of, you know, give up on the sort of his core support, which was in the east and the southeast of Ukraine, and to focus on trying to gain the support of people in central Ukraine and western Ukraine. So obviously, you know, the very policy that you would think the Russians would not be very favorable to, but that was Manafort. That was what Manafort was telling Yanukovych. That's what he was advising Yanukovych to do. You know, Kilimnik was working for him during this time. Kilimnik before that had worked for the John McCain's ridiculous International Republican Institute. He worked there, I don't know, maybe even 10 years. And so that's essentially US government. And he was also regarded as a trustworthy informant for the US State Department. The US State Department relied on Kilimnik's information, and they regarded him as a reliable source. So somehow, again, the media, the lying media, kind of invented out of whole cloth the nonsense that Kilimnik was actually working for the GRU. He was a Russian intelligence. You know, no evidence, absolutely zero evidence for any of that. And if somebody had actually listened, I think Aaron Mate had interviewed Kilimnik, and Kilimnik had said in that interview, well, you know, the problem with Russiagate was there were no Russians in Russiagate, so they had to, you know, the media had to pounce on me. We've got a Russian, so let's make him the central figure. We need a Russian as a central figure. So suddenly Kilimnik became a central figure, and then there was again this sinister meeting between Paul Manafort and Kilimnik, and in which somehow, you know, Manafort had passed on information which to Kilimnik, and that Kilimnik, you know, supposedly working for the GRU, Kilimnik would then pass it all on to Russian intelligence. No evidence. I mean, it was completely made up of a whole cloth. I mean, I started off talking about absence of malice. This is worse than absence of malice. That's absolutely, you know, what Manafort, and this is, you know, this is also in Gates's book, because Gates was Manafort's #2. So they meet for a drink in New York, and Manafort passed on some polling data to Kilimnik. This was publicly available. There was nothing, you know, secret or classified or anything else. He just sort of passed this on to Kilimnik, because, you know, here we talk about something, something that we talked about yesterday. Kilimnik had connections with Rinat Akhmetov, and Rinat Akhmetov is somebody for whom Manafort had worked in the past. Rinat Akhmetov, if you're following the events in Ukraine, yesterday the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, had alleged that there was a coup in the works to topple him on December the 1st or December the 2nd. Well, today is November the 27th, so you know, I guess the coup should take place in the next few days. The Russians are obviously behind this coup, and who else but Rinat Akhmetov. And Rinat Akhmetov, is the richest man in Ukraine. But in any case, I mean, the point was Manafort had done some work for Akhmetov, and basically he hadn't been paid for it. As you get with billionaires, they're very cheap with their money. So he basically hadn't been paid. But what he wanted to show Kilimnik was that hey, I'm the head of a presidential campaign. I'm a big shot, and that this might persuade Akhmetov to take an interest in him again. So that was showed, hey, look, I'm a big shot. Look, I mean, I'm the head of this presidential campaign, the Republican presidential campaign. And if you look at this polling data, we're not doing badly. I mean, we're still behind, but we've made up some ground. That's what he was saying. There was nothing classified about all of this. And in any case, Malice, who wrote at great length about this Manafort Kilimnik connection, Malice suggested that, well, he Kilimnik had passed this on to the GRU. But where's the evidence that Kilimnik passed any of this on to the GRU? I don't even know whether Kilimnik ever passed this on to Rinat Akhmetov either. But that was the point. So you still get these stories, and the way you can show that there's something dark and sinister about this is you put out an absolute lie, a complete lie, that there's some evidence that Kilimnik was working for the GRU. Malice suggests this, but Malice has no evidence for it. Now, the Senate Intelligence Committee, run by that drunk Democrat Mark Warner, who was basically the leading figure, even though the Republicans were were the majority in the Senate, but nonetheless, Mark Warner was obviously the moving force behind it. So they take it as absolutely given that Kilimnik was working for the GRU, and therefore Manafort was passing on this information to the GRU. That's it. I mean, complete nonsense. And then, of course, you get creatures like David Fromm, who just repeated and said, "Oh, look, the Senate Intelligence Committee said this. Well, the Senate Intelligence Committee said this. That must be true." And so you get this sense that this is an official finding. But the point is this: the Senate Intelligence Committee had far less information at its disposal than Malice. Remember, Malice was working for the Justice Department, in other words, which is the FBI. So Malice could have every information that he wanted. The Senate doesn't have that kind of access to information. And basically, the Senate claims about Kilimnik, they're all based on journalistic stories. I mean, it's all, if you look through the footnotes of these gargantuan reports, their sources are all journalistic, media reports. They don't have any information that Kilimnik was working for the Russians, any more than they have any information that Natalia Veselnitskaya, that Russian lawyer, had any kind of Russian governmental connections. Somebody speculates about this, and then another reporter repeats it, and then lo and behold, it suddenly becomes, where she was obviously working for the Kremlin. So, that's the way you get this, this echo chamber in everyone, which simply repeats the same thing. And then when it winds its way into official reports, the journalists, of whose dubious reporting these reports are compiled, then say, "Hey, look what we find in the Senate Intelligence Committee report." This is the Senate Intelligence Committee. Hey, they say that there was clear evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia, and the evidence that there was really no serious finding about Trump-Russia collusion came from the testimony of all of the key figures in the Russiagate saga, the testimony they testified before the House Intelligence Committee. Their testimony was kept secret till finally it was published. I think it was so that they testified in 2017, but it wasn't published, I think, till sometime in 2019, maybe even 2020. It's already sometime later. And all of these government officials, who went on, Morning Joe, and they, went on, all these TV shows. They say, well, I've seen evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, particularly Adam Schiff, and all of those, Evelyn Farkas, and all this. Oh, we have seen this evidence. Oh, it's very clearly, we know all this stuff, and it turns out that when they were testifying under oath, and when they were actually asked, have you seen evidence for any of your claims, they all say, no, I haven't. I was going by newspaper reports. And then every one of them, and even the biggest of them all, the biggest of them, which was the claim by that the DNC was hacked by by the GRU, CrowdStrike, talking about CrowdStrike. They said, well, we really didn't have any direct evidence. We just sort of hypothesized that this was the most likely thing. So that claim, the central claim of Russiagate, which is, the GRU hacked into the DNC servers, passed this on to WikiLeaks, who in turn published this, and that somehow proved whatever, the Trump-Russia collusion. Even that, there was never any evidence of this. CrowdStrike had simply hypothesized all of this. And so, what we got from this is that people can sound off to the media, because when you're on TV or when you're talking to a New York Times reporter, you're not under oath. And you can say anything you like, and then the media can regurgitate it, and then they repeat it, and then something you said in the New York Times is then republished on CNN, and then and then New York Times republishes what CNN published, and so on. And then, of course, it all winds its way into the gargantuan Senate intelligence report. So again, but that is very different for what people say under oath. And when it comes to under oath, essentially, all of them, all of the key actors in the Russiagate saga have to admit they have no evidence. There's no evidence at all for any of the collusion, even though the media kept peddling the story. And so, I mean, I think people. Here we have Brett Harris, who talks about, Goldstone lied to Don Jr. about dirt on Hillary. He lied to Veselnitskaya that Don Jr. could help a client falsely accused by Browder. And then Glenn Simpson testified about Browder's lies to Senate House. So, this is kind of really getting into the weeds here. So the point was that Veselnitskaya had to wangle a meeting with the top people in the Trump campaign, and the way it worked, I think I'm a little hazy myself about the detail, was this guy Goldstone. He was a publicist for a pop singer, and that Goldstone wangled a meeting with I think he knew Don Jr. from the time that Trump had come to Moscow in 2013 when he was promoting his beauty pageant. And so he told Don Jr. That Veselnitskaya had dirt on Hillary. Veselnitskaya had not really said that to anyone. She didn't say that. I mean, her preoccupation was with her client who was being sued by Bill Browder. Browder was very litigious, and he went around suing all sorts of people, claiming that they had stolen money from him. And what's really disgraceful about all of that is that a variety of official government agencies went along and helped Browder out in this. So so we had the Southern District of New York, run at that time by Preet Bharara, who indeed went after Veselnitskaya's client entirely on the say-so of Bill Browder, and I think that's how Veselnitskaya got in on this, because her client was just getting screwed over by this ridiculous claim by Browder that he was in possession of stolen money from Browder. So yeah, I mean that's the way it goes. Once you essentially kind of the powerful government agencies allow themselves to be used by wealthy, politically influential figures like Browder, then it is absolute disgrace. And of course, that move by Preet Bharara to go after Veselnitskaya's client, it didn't really yield anything. I mean, I think they came to a settlement, but the settlement was well short of Browder's claims of how much he was owed and then how much money was stolen. So it was a kind of a face-saving settlement, because simply that the Southern District of New York could not continue with its ridiculous lawsuit. And so I mean, but this is really what continues, because the media are very anxious to rehabilitate themselves. So they've now cobbled together a kind of a new fantasy fiction as to why didn't any of this pan out. The big story, Trump was working for the Kremlin. So we had one thread is, oh well, Mueller didn't really pursue Trump's financial interests. Somehow he was prevented from doing so. If only he had pursued Trump's financial interests, he would have been able to draw all of the lines between Trump and the Kremlin. Well, of course, all this is complete nonsense, because if there had been any financial links between Trump and the Kremlin, you can be absolutely certain that Mueller would have pursued it. And so this is your big excuse as to why Mueller failed to deliver. And then you now have this this attempt by creatures like David Frum, and you can be absolutely certain that whenever there's a lie to be to be purveyed, Frum will be there. So if within the next few years we need somebody to lie to us about whatever, Russia, Ukraine, Hungary, Frum will be there in order to articulate it. I mean, that's who Frum is. So when Frum comes along and writes, I think this week in The Atlantic, this long article saying, no, Russiagate was not a hoax. Look at this abundant evidence. That's what you would expect. And of course, it keeps the troops in line, because the troops were getting a little demoralized, because they're saying, well, hey, what happened here? And this we went on and on about Russiagate, and then it turns out that it didn't yield anything. I mean, maybe we should start thinking about ourselves and say, what's really going on here. So boom, there's Frum saying, no, we were on the right lines. Russiagate, that was no hoax. That's really serious. And as I say, how does that work? Well, it works by just list all of these things. Oh yeah, what about Carter Page? What about Paul Manafort? What about Konstantin Kilimnik? What about Trump's beauty pageant in 2013? And then if you list all this nonsense, it sounds like, hey, you've got a serious article here. But of course, that's always been the case with conspiracy theories. I mean, when you have the conspiracy theory, when there's really no real evidence for something, what you do is you just pile up a lot of detail and figure that that this accumulation of detail will intimidate anyone who's looking on. Wow, boy, that's quite a powerful case you got there. And then it's an old trick, which is this is pretty formidable. That's a thick tome. If it's such a thick tome, you must have a lot of evidence there of whatever it is that you want to prove. But of course, as I said, 100 times nothing is still nothing. So Mary Kate Golden says, I've been trying to do a super chat YouTube and it's not accepting my details. Yeah, well, that's, I don't know. I'm sorry. So do I have PayPal? I have to think about that. I mean, because I'm not a great expert on this, but thank you at least for thinking about the super chat. So Brett Harris was obviously follows all these things very closely. Is saying here that Preet Bharara had to amend the complaint 3 times as Browder's lies were continually exposed. And then they agreed to a settlement of $6 million. And Browder immediately froze Katsev's assets in Europe. He was forced to sell his New York real estate. Browder's very, very good at manipulating authorities. I mean, it requires a certain amount of genius that an absolutely disgusting figure that like he is. Has managed to persuade so many people that some great wrong has been done to him, whereas in fact, we know from the video deposition, which again I think is available on the internet. I mean, I have it, I think, downloaded, but I think it's still available. But you can see that all of his chicanery, all of the ways in which he was lying and cheating the Russian government of the tax revenues, and so, I mean, his problem was that he just got very greedy. I mean, there were plenty of greedy characters in Russia. These, the oligarchs, and plenty of greedy people from the West came over and tried to loot Russia dry. But he was one of the worst because he had so many different schemes to avoid paying taxes and to get to steal money from the Russian government, that eventually he was undone by his very greed, which often happens. Anyway, I have a super chat here from Kevin Daw. Nice to see you again, Kevin. Very good that you've joined us. And he said, so do you think that the West will double down on vaccine mandates in the face of increased public protest, including real crackdown with police and military? Well, I tend to think that yes. I mean, I think that the way it works is as long as the public is scared, they're willing to give up their freedoms. I mean, it's a formula that it's tried and true, always worked in the past. And it certainly worked during this this COVID hysteria. So you can get people frightened. Oh my God, it's a pandemic. Millions of people are going to die. So we better give up our freedoms. Now, what has happened is that as we're getting into the 3rd winter of lockdowns, of vaccines, and the social distancing, and the masks and everything else, and particularly on the vaccine mandates, because that's a serious business. You're pumping chemicals into people's bodies, and there's no end to it. And suddenly people are indeed protesting, and then lo and behold, as if by clockwork, we now have this weekend the horror, scare, shock story of this South African mutation, which is so much more infectious than any of the other variants of COVID. You know, it's going to blow right past the vaccines, and none of the vaccines are any good against it. So the more suspicious minds will wonder, well, isn't it strange? So we had these massive protests around the world about these vaccine mandates, and suddenly we're reading about this horrific variant about which we can't do anything. Terrifying, absolutely terrifying, and this is the one that's going to destroy civilization as we know it, and therefore, hey, you're trying to you protest. What are you protesting? You're protesting mass deaths which are going to come from this South African variant. And again, we've seen this film before. It's people getting skeptical, people getting cynical, and then here it is. We better go back to the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates. So I do think that there's going to be greater crackdown, and I think that this news about the South African variant will have a depressing effect on the protests, because suddenly you think, well, I'm protesting, but look at this deadly variant that's coming our way. I mean, that's really the way the COVID has gone. I mean, you wonder, why is it that even apparently sensible political figures, whether it's Viktor Orban in Hungary or whether it's Putin in Russia, you think, well, why are they buying into this? And I think they too are afraid. They too just don't know enough about this COVID virus, and they're afraid that if they don't enact vaccine mandates, if they don't lock things down and insist on masks and everything else, they're going to have hundreds of thousands of deaths on their hands, and they'll get blamed for it. So I think there is some of these political leaders are themselves afraid. But of course, without question, there are politicians that and many of them who love nothing more than to seize enormous amount of power for themselves, and to impose crackdowns and to send people to prison. I mean, some people love on that. People get off on police arresting demonstrators, police arresting people who are not wearing masks. I mean, there's there are many people, and who knows, maybe a lot of people who go into politics for that very reason, either to get rich or to throw their weight around and to crack down on the populace. And unfortunately, it is a truism that once you surrender freedoms to government, the government's not going to give them back to you. I mean, it's just that they're not going to do it. The only way they will surrender these powers is if there are massive protests, massive millions of people out on the streets and saying enough is enough, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. If that happens, then the governments will just be forced to surrender. Which is why, just as earlier this week, we seem to be watching these massive demonstrations take place, and then lo and behold, few days later, the South African variant, more deadly than any of them, the deadliest virus. So I think this will have suspect that it'll have it could break the back of the protest. We'll see what happens this weekend, but I'd be surprised if the protest this weekend will be as substantial as the one last weekend. And again, yeah, so I mean, here we have, Kevin says that, New York State of emergency is such a joke. Where are the state legislators fighting back to take back some powers? Well, there aren't too many of them. I think it's it's an unfortunate thing that, as I said, too many politicians love throwing their weight around. They love, because, many of them, basically despise ordinary people, the ordinary voters. I mean, they need their votes, and every 2 or 4 years they go and, they say what they think voters want to hear. But once the election is over, they just essentially think that these voters are really stupid, and therefore, they should just simply do as they're told and listen to their betters, because the betters know what's good for them. So COVID is just a wonderful thing. Well, what do you know about this virus? We know. We studied the science, even though not one of them has the foggiest idea of what science is. I think it's and as Kevin says, I look forward to the new variant right before the 22 midterms. Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's very true. I mean, it's an interesting, if one follows the arc of COVID, and how in the early days of 2020, at that time, the Democrats were really quite skeptical about COVID. I mean, they thought that it was Trump had sort of invented this whole thing, and maybe to distract attention from the impeachment. That was his first impeachment. And if you remember, you had what's her face, Nancy Pelosi, saying, "Oh, I'm going to Chinatown in San Francisco." That was still in maybe around March 2020. Oh yeah, Chinatown. Stop all this nonsense about the Chinese and that the New York mayor Bill de Blasio. Oh, life is normal. Don't worry about a thing. And when Trump imposed his this flight ban on the Chinese or people coming from China, of course he was attacked as racist, xenophobic, and the rest. I mean, there was no sympathy at all in the media or among the Democrats for Trump. I mean, he was just simply making this up. And he was just going in for racism. I mean, you can look through all the tweets that Biden and Harris and Pelosi and all the others, what they were tweeting about in early 2020, that this whole thing, COVID, was just invented by Trump in order to pursue his racist, xenophobic agenda. Then the Democrats just went to complete reverse. And then they saw the political opportunity that COVID provided them, because now they can say, "Hey, look, I mean, we can now attack Trump for not doing enough about COVID." So first they'd been attacking him for basically doing this racist, xenophobic stuff. Imagine preventing people coming in from China, and now well, Trump isn't doing anything about COVID, and all the deaths from COVID are on him. And again, the media happily went along with that. And most significantly, of course, not just that they could use COVID in order to attack Trump for not having done enough about it, but they could use COVID in order to change election rules. And so all the regulations, the restrictions, all the security measures that had been in place, put in place in order to prevent election cheating, could be just thrown out of the window, because if it's COVID, we can't possibly have people going in and voting in the normal way. We have to have mail-in voting, because mail-in voting, but we won't bother with any of the restrictive measures that you would need in order to ensure that mail-in voting is actually done in a proper, secure fashion. So that was it. So I think Democrats, saw all the advantages of COVID, and how they could use it against Trump, and no one really even noticed how they just made this overnight reversal from, where they were in, say, March 2020, when they were dismissing the significance of COVID and say, hey, party like, it's, like it's the New Year down in Chinatown. So suddenly, oh my God, COVID. And Trump isn't taking it seriously. Trump is killing Americans because he's not taking it seriously. It was an amazing performance. But of course, it's interesting that Biden, who yesterday announced this travel ban coming from Africa, has managed to get away with sorry has managed to get away with no one attacking him for, hey, isn't that a racist thing to do? Aren't you banning people of color coming from Africa? These are 8 countries from Africa who are being banned from coming to America. And how come that? But I mean, again, imagine if it had been Trump. I mean, of course, it's a very, by now, that's an easy exercise. Well, imagine if it were Trump. But yeah, you could say, imagine if it were Trump saying, well, I'm banning people from 8 African countries from entering the United States. Yeah, I think the media stories write themselves. But again, if one looks at the arc of the story, remember, Trump is the one who got the vaccines off the ground. Now, of course, we can really question about the effectiveness of these vaccines, and and whether they're really even vaccines. But nonetheless, whatever it is, I mean, Trump managed to move the government to push the vaccines. And but nonetheless, as the media reported, they say somehow, well, Trump is against vaccine. Trump is somehow encouraging vaccine skepticism and all the rest. So then and again, we already know more people have died from COVID this year than died from COVID last year, and that's with the vaccine. That's with whatever the exact number of what percentage of the American population, 60 to 70% of the American population has been vaccinated. Even so, more people have died this year from COVID than last year. But again, Trump, who's to blame for all of last year's deaths from COVID, he personally killed whatever it was it 750,000 Americans or whatever. But again, Biden apparently is not responsible for the deaths of Americans this year. So see if there are any other questions. Yeah. So I mean, it's an interesting, again. I mean, the story. I mean, we've had the media that have peddled the story of Trump being anti-vax, and that the Republicans are anti-vax, for which again there's no evidence, and because again they confound 2 different issues, which is the skepticism about the vaccines to hostility toward vaccine mandates. I mean, they are two separate issues, which is, you could say, I think highly of vaccines, and even maybe COVID vaccines. I think, even though the COVID vaccines don't have anything like the success rate that we were led to believe the COVID vaccines would have. I mean, the COVID vaccines, are, to say the least, very leaky. But anyway, it is the media deliberately confound the issue of vaccine attitude towards the vaccine with attitude toward the vaccine mandate. Of course, the vaccine mandate is a very different issue, because there is something very, very troubling about the governments imposing a mandate, forcing you to take chemicals that have really not been properly tested, not in a way that is usually regarded as acceptable by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States and other regulatory bodies, which requires years of experimentation and testing and so on. So the government's doing that, and then governments compelling employers, private employers, to essentially put a gun to people's heads, employees' heads. Either you take the vaccine or we fire you. This is a very, very troubling, to say the least, development. And I think that people who do value liberty and people who do think that governments should not have that sort of power, they can just simply compel you to take a chemical that goes against your principles, that you worry about your health. I mean, you have women, understandably, worry about their fertility. You have people who worry about their natural immunity, to what extent, if you keep taking these the vaccines, what does it do to your natural immunity? I mean, is it going to undermine it? So these are all very real questions which the scientists have no answers to, because they don't have the answers to, because they keep changing their answers. They keep saying something different from what they were saying originally. And so therefore, when they say, oh, well, you need to take a booster shot. So people said, okay, well, I'll take my 2 shots of the vaccine. That's I'll take that, my hit. I'll take it for the team, because I want to get on with my normal life, go wherever I want, travel wherever I want, and I'll take, that's what's required of me. I'll take my 2 shots. And a lot of people have that attitude. That's not good enough. You're not regarded as fully vaccinated unless you've had your boost. Well, they're saying that a vaccine is good, and not even good, but one has to assume that that these viruses are very smart. Viruses, I think, by definition, are very smart. They adapt and mutate in order to fool the vaccines. And so, if this vaccine is good for 6 months, one has to assume that you take 1 booster shot, it's going to be good for 4 months, and then you'd have to take another booster shot. But how long is that going to be good for? Well, that's going to be good for 3 months, and then the next one's going to be 2 months. It's going to be less and less, because the viruses are essentially just figuring out how to beat the vaccine. So that means the governments and the employers are demanding that we just keep taking these these booster shots ad infinitum for the rest of our lives, maybe every day. Where does this end? And this is chemicals that we know very little about, and we now have to take this all the time. It has to come a point at which people say enough is enough, because otherwise, we're just going to be, the public is just going to be killing us off. Anyway, I have a Spectre in the air. Welcome back, Spectre. Sorry I missed last week. Yeah, we missed you too, Spectre. So ran 5,000 with the 5K with my daughter. She won. Okay, that's very good. Congratulations. Yeah, you're a fitter man than I am. And I am late this week. Yeah, thinking no third jab for me. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I also was, I'm in no mood for a third jab, precisely because why should should I believe that this third jab will be any more effective than the second jab? And then am I ready then for the fourth jab? But and it's going back to what we were talking about earlier. It seems that many people are willing to give up their freedoms for security. I mean that's as old as human history. Security, is what people prize. Understandably, they prize it, above all else. And when they have a pandemic, they're ready to do what governments tell them to do. And even though it's clear that governments haven't known what was going on, and they haven't been upfront about so much, and they keep changing their position, keep changing their views. But even so, that people feel like, I need to do what people who are wiser and more knowledgeable than I do know. I mean, if you look at this person, Fauci, this Tony Fauci, I mean, so everything you already know about him, not just leave aside all the different positions that he has taken. But there's ultimately the real question here, which is he was clearly involved in supporting gain of function research in Wuhan. Now, he learns in late 2019, early 2020, that this virus originated in Wuhan. Now, he goes along and says, "Oh no, well, this is the origin is this wet market, a natural origin," which is very, very interesting that Fauci wanted to go with that story and persuade it, because he has real powers of persuasion. He controls the money, the flow of money to scientists and university departments and so on. So he has this power, and he persuaded everyone to go along with this natural origin. Now, this has nothing to do with racism, because if you go along with the thesis that the virus originated naturally and that it came from this wet market in Wuhan, that doesn't reflect well on the Chinese at all. I mean, everyone has already known for years about these wet market, the unsanitary, unhygienic conditions there. They were supposed to shut them down. They didn't shut them down. Everybody knew that they were selling all sorts of wild exotic animals there. These wild exotic animals who could have been carrying any number of viruses that were basically deadly to humans, because humans are just simply, their systems had never come across these viruses, and so they could have any number of effects. So the Chinese had been warned for years that you have to close these wet markets down. They didn't do so. But in any case, the issue here was, because it was clear evidence very early on that this virus was artificial. I mean, that was and somebody emailed Fauci about that. He said that if you're looking at the genetic structure, this looks an artificial creation. It's not a naturally found virus. So Fauci, who was in this position within the government, with this very senior position, was highly paid bureaucrat in the government, he could have alerted the administration, he could have alerted the public about his suspicions that this virus was artificially created, and therefore it could well have been created in this Wuhan Institute of Virology. But Fauci did not do that. And let's remember, if Fauci had done that, there might have been at least an opportunity at that stage to pressure the Chinese to come clean about what was going on at that lab. And they then removed all of their database for the viruses that sometime around that time, they just removed all of their database. So the rest of the world is in the dark about what the hell was going on in that Institute of Virology. Now, Fauci may have some idea of what was going on there, but the Chinese have refused at all to tell us what they were doing there. And that may well be one of the problems why we're really still getting nowhere with these vaccines, because ultimately we just simply don't know what it was that they actually created in that in that lab. Fauci had some knowledge, he had some inkling, he could have alerted the top people in the administration about his suspicions. He didn't do that, but now, of course, it's too late. I mean, the rest of the world has kind of missed the bus on this one. Chinese are obdurate; they refuse to cooperate. They refuse even to acknowledge that the virus originated in China, or it originated in Wuhan. I mean, they just simply say, "Oh no, it was in America, in France, in Italy, it was Vietnam, India. Well, it has nothing to do with us." So in a way, I mean, we're kind of, the rest of the world is still in the dark about this virus, as to, what to do with it. I mean, it's certainly, all the various things that they've tried doesn't seem to be terribly effective against it. And Fauci, who could have helped, at least get somewhere with with this issue of what the hell did they create in that lab. I mean, Fauci provided no help, but there he is. He still is everywhere. He's still on the media. All the reporters still fawn on him. He comes along and he holds forth. And no matter how contradictory all of his claims are, no matter how much he dissimulates, how dishonest he is. I mean, everyone has seen how he tried to evade Rand Paul's questions, and how he did all this showboating when he called Rand Paul, "You are lying," knowing that he would be on the media. Everyone would pick up, "Oh, Fauci has shown up, Senator Rand Paul." So anyway. We have Spectre in the air, another super chat. Thank you so much, Spectre. It says, Dr. Fauci and his ilk are bad people. He paid Wuhan to develop gain of function, and then easy to think that CCP knew what they had. They had the original genome and kept it secret. I agree with that. I mean, I agree, and I think that's what's really troubling about all of this. That they knew, what it was that they had created in that lab. So therefore, they would essentially have been able, at that time, to help the rest of the world to try to figure out what this virus was. And I think that would have helped to develop, more effective vaccines. But the Chinese have not done so. And I think this is, and then Fauci, who knew all about all of this. I mean, and we know that he knew all about it because when he received that email from that guy, that scientist Anderson, saying that, hey, this looks like an artificial creation, he immediately, boom, everybody huddle. We have a big telephone call, and then we all put out the story. No, a naturally occurring virus. And now, it's now almost 2 years have gone by. The Chinese have basically got away with, obduracy by their refusal to come clean, and now we can't really, do anything. And so we just go on, coming up with all these boosters and so on, because ultimately we just don't know what happened in that Wuhan Institute of Virology, and I think that really speaks very badly, I think, of China. I how, is here at the Gaggle. I mean, I personally, take a realpolitik view of the world. We're not, every country should look after its own interests and should not be driven by ideological opposition to one form of government or another form of government. So, we should work together, whether you like the Chinese government, Chinese communists, or you don't, whether you like Putin and or you don't, whether you like the governments in Iran or whatever. You should only be concerned with your national interest, and you have to work together with whomever. But you have to think, if China wants to be a serious player in the world, if China wants to be a great power and wants to be, then it has to act as a responsible power. Then I think so. Being a great power, with that comes great responsibility. And if you come along when you have a pandemic like this, and you just simply refuse to even admit that this is where it came from, you refuse to cooperate with the rest of the world, which has been taken a huge hit on this. I mean, who knows how many trillions of dollars of wealth has gone down the toilet as a result of this. And if you refuse to do that, you try to help the rest of the world with this, and instead you come up with this nonsense that, oh, it started in America, it started in India, and all this, then ultimately you are not a responsible great power, and you cannot, and then you ultimately cannot be taken seriously as a great power, and then you generate the hostility and suspicion and resentment of other powers reasonably, because then they say, well, this is not a power that is in the business of trying to create a more peaceful, secure, cooperative world, which is kind of what you're supposed to do. I mean, everybody's supposed to do that. It's written in the Charter of the United Nations that all nations are, yes, they have their own, their sovereign states, they have their own national interests, and everyone is obligated to respect the national interests of all of the sovereign members states of the United Nations. But there is still an aspiration to cooperate with one another in order to create a more peaceful and secure world. And China has not done this, and I think that that's a very serious issue, and one that it's appropriate to take measures against it. This is a power that doesn't take its responsibilities seriously, and therefore is not in the business of advancing our collective interests towards peace and security. So I think that's the so Brett says, George, you have zero knowledge that China created the virus. Well, I think, do I have the smoking gun? No, I think that we have the enough of circumstantial evidence. I mean, and that's all you do. I mean, this is not we're not in the business of, forensic science, working out in the lab and, to have definitive proof. No. If we don't have definitive proof that it was created in the lab in China, we have an awful lot of circumstantial evidence, and that's good enough for geopolitics. This isn't a police investigation, and we haven't been able to conduct a police investigation because China hasn't been cooperative. Anyway, so spectrum in the air is another super chat. Thank you so much, Spectre. So CCP are evil, same folks who brought us to Tiananmen Square. Chinese peoples are victims of CCP like the rest of the world, and Biden in their pocket. I mean, I think that I'm not a great fan of the Chinese CCP, and you ultimately still have to consider that this is a CCP that has done an awful lot of. I mean, it's certainly, it has advanced its people. The people are much more prosperous and so on. But it's still the CCP, that gave us Mao's Cultural Revolution, Mao's Great Leap Forward. It's there's an awful lot of bad things that the CCP has done in the past, and it's sort of it's brutal policies here and there, in Tibet and so on. But nonetheless, I mean, I'm a realist and believe that one should work together with other powers and not worry what goes on inside the other countries, because you have to ultimately, whether you're president of the United States or you're the president of Russia, you always are thinking about what is in the national interest of my country, which is really what all leaders have to do. And therefore, if you're the president of the United States, you ultimately say, okay, well, I mean, however much I may feel about the Uyghurs and whatever I think about Hong Kong or Taiwan or whatever, or Tibet, ultimately, my primary concern is the well-being of my people. The problem is with COVID is that all the evidence points to China being responsible for what's happened to my people. My people have suffered from COVID. They're not just my people. The people from other countries have suffered from COVID. All the evidence points to the origin in China, and China has been unhelpful in trying to get to the bottom of it, and therefore to deal with this particular pandemic, to bring this pandemic to an end, and to make sure that we don't have any more pandemics, because we can't go through this. I mean, this one is still ongoing. We're beginning in the winter months. God knows what other restrictive measures are going to happen this winter. I mean, already, country after country is imposing more and more restriction. So this pandemic, we still haven't got to the bottom of that. But ultimately, what about the next pandemic? What about the one in 5 years, 10 years? And ultimately, we would expect cooperation from China. So here, if I'm a president of the United States and I'm thinking about what happened to the American people, I do have a responsibility to the American people. I don't have a responsibility to the people of Tibet. I don't have a responsibility to Hong Kong or Taiwan, but to the American people, I do. And there I can point to, China as not having done anything good for my people. So anyway, let me see. So Anti-Carmen says fentanyl from China is the worst weapon being used against us, so we just let it keep coming. Yeah, disgusting. Yeah, the fentanyl. Yeah, I agree. It's a very bad thing. So let's see else. I mean, it's good. I mean, obviously, I see from the gagglers. I mean, we have some disagreements. I think I don't think everybody agrees with my take on China. I mean, my feeling is that, look, I am it's no secret I'm a critic of U.S. foreign policy, and many things, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in its obsessive hatred toward Russia. And I'm very critical. I'm very critical of what it did to Yugoslavia, what it did to Syria, what it did to Iraq, and so on. But that doesn't mean that countries that oppose the United States must be the good guys. And I think that there are people who say, I'm not referring to anyone here on the Gaggle board who may disagree with me. I don't question anyone's intellectual integrity. There's room for disagreement. My point is that that often there is a kind of a knee-jerk reaction, understandable, that, well, if the United States doesn't like this power, and if this power is hostile to the United States, therefore they must be the good guys. And I just don't, I need to be persuaded that the China, communist China are the good guys. Now, when it comes to Russia, I think it's a very different case, because I think I think Russia, has done nothing that at all that, at least, very much in the recent decades, that one should be critical of. I think Russia has been very, very reasonable. I think they gave up the Soviet Union. They dissolved the Warsaw Pact. They gave up their communist system. They let the Baltic states go. They even didn't raise any strong objections to the Baltic states joining a military alliance that is hostile to Russia. They've been absolutely model power in terms of reasonableness and peacefulness. I mean, I think that but Russia has its own interests, and Russia clearly security is a very big concern for Russia. This is a country that has been invaded, was invaded twice in the 20th century. Two massive invasions, and a massive invasion in the 19th century from Napoleon. So they are very conscious of their security, and I think that's understandable. And as a result of that, they have drawn very close to China, and I think that's a very understandable. And so Russia has not said anything about the origins of COVID. They've not pursued that issue. And they always there when they talk to the Chinese, Xi Jinping, they're always our cooperation, our friendship, nothing can break it. We will never go against each other. We will always have one another's back, and I understand that, and I think that that because Russia, I think, feels very threatened from the West, from all of the machinations and manipulations from NATO, which we've often talked about at the Gaggle, how NATO has essentially inch by inch has moved its positions right next to Russia, that it's continually trying to get more and more states within NATO into this very hostile, this very anti-Russian military alliance. And so Russia is very concerned about NATO's encroachments, very concerned about this constant American hostility and American accusations and the whole anti-Russian propaganda campaign that prevails in the West. And because of that, they have drawn very close to China, because that's their ally. And I think that is the way of the world, and that is how countries act in their own national interest. So whatever, the Russians may well have questions about the origins of COVID, and they may well have their own concerns that China has not been cooperative and that China hasn't come clean about what went on at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But they overlook it because they have higher interests at stake. Their national security is at stake, and so it's because of their national security they're not going to pursue any avenues of exploration that the Russians, the Chinese wouldn't like. I mean, they made that decision. Said, we will stand with China, whatever the issue, and that's more important to us than to discover the origins of COVID. But that doesn't apply to the rest of the world. I mean, the rest of the world, I think, should press China to get to the bottom of Wuhan. But the Chinese, and the Australians have tried this, and boom, the Chinese acted against Australia. They hit them with all kinds of trade restrictions, and that's the way the Chinese act. I mean, now Australia obviously isn't strong enough by itself to confront China, but I think the rest of the world should have confronted China, and to find out more about COVID. It hasn't happened, and now time has elapsed, and the trail has gone cold. But it would have been nice, we'd love to see the database, that database at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that disappeared. And so we would love to know about what exactly the Chinese were working on. So Brett says all the Russians accept the Chinese explanation of COVID and not be overly suspicious. I don't think so. I don't think that's the Russian position. The Russian position is just simply, hey, no good crying over spilled milk. What we need to do is to make sure that the vaccines are available, that everybody, that there's, we cooperate on getting, proper medical treatment to the proper places. That's what we have to deal with, rather than, rehashing the past. I think that's how I read what the Russian position is on the origins of COVID. They just say we're not going down that path, because if we go down that path, we will get into a confrontation with China. We don't want to get into a confrontation with China, because it's more important for us to have that China has our back while we're confronting the West than this. And I think that's we're just not going to do anything that's going to affect adversely our relations with China. So Coop says, come on, George, you sound like a Biden-Hillary fan. Really? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's, I don't know, maybe you're being sarcastic, but I don't think Biden and Hillary have even remotely suggested that we put, hold the Chinese feet to the fire and get to the bottom of COVID. I mean, no. I mean, other than, well, it's all Trump's fault. Everything Trump's to blame. Trump. I mean, they never, they never say anything like that. So Brett says, being highly aggressive towards China is hardly going to make them cooperate. Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, I think that's a fair point. China is a great power, without question. And I think that if China doesn't want to cooperate, China's not going to cooperate. And China has economic and financial muscle to apply against anyone who makes all sorts of noises that the Chinese don't like, and they've shown that they're ready to do that. As I said, they did that against Australia when Australia raised the issue of the origins of COVID. Boom, they hit Australia hard with on the Australian wines and the trading that goes on. So yeah, no question, China has the muscle to withstand what the world might throw at them. If there had been a united front, I think that might have been different. And I think if there'd been a united front among the states collectively early in 2020, I think China might have been forced to be more cooperative. I don't know, but I think that was the time to do it. But I think now is, unfortunately, it's too late now. And you wouldn't be able to get a united front. It's just, so. So Mary Kay Golden says, China and Russia are not running to the media to declare they're doing their investigation on COVID. No, they're not. They're not. But that doesn't mean that they are doing investigations. I certainly haven't heard of any Russian investigation. I'm quite sure there isn't any proper Chinese investigation. But as it turns out, there hasn't been any proper American investigation. I mean, I think the American investigation was a joke. I mean, they say, "Oh, I don't know, it could be this, could be that. Who the hell knows?" So, I mean, you have the United States intelligence. Who knows how many billions of dollars that are spent on its intelligence services, and they're unable or they claim to be unable to reach a conclusion on the origins of COVID. Well, maybe it was the natural origins, may have been the wet market in Wuhan, may have been the lab. Who knows? I think we may say that because we don't have any particular insight, but you would expect well-funded intelligence services to have an insight. Anyway, so Spectre is again very, very generously helping with the super chat. And Spectre says Russia realizes US is stupid regarding foreign policies are the bad guys in everything. China is the real threat to US and the world. Elites love China. Well, it's one in which, China is a very, very big country with a huge economic and financial muscle. Much more so. I mean, if you just think of it in terms of its population, I mean, its population is something like 10 times that of Russia. Enormous economic potential, with financial potential, and they're ready to use it. I mean, it's clear that they are ready to use it. They make all sorts of absurd claims in the South China Sea, and unfortunately, so Spectre is right. They have bought up elites around the world. They bought them up because they offer money, and it's cheaper to buy up elites than it is to build rockets and fighter aircraft and so on, because you buy up a professor here, a department there, build a university here, and there's, I mean, you compare that to how much it costs to build a B-2 bomber. You're talking about a couple of $1 billion, maybe even more. But buying people up, that's a very cheap exercise. And the Chinese understand this, and that's why they've been very successful at this. I mean, just how many people, and they openly admit it. I mean, that really we kind of have bought up the elites of the West, particularly the United States. They open and say, yeah, they do our bidding for us, because we've been lining their pockets. It's not hard to do. I mean, all you do, you go to university, the elite universities in the United States, and offer them, well, how much do you want? Well, $1 million here, a couple of million there, and what about this? Well, you get a nice little stipend from us. And in the end, you buy up, some of the elite universities, you get constant good propaganda, constant good publicity. And the Chinese have been doing this. Russia can't really do it. Russia doesn't really have that kind of money, and to buy up universities. The Chinese have done it, and that's hence they're constantly getting good publicity. I mean, it's I think that's I mean, people like George Soros have also figured out that that's how you gain influence. You can do it on the cheap. Buying people is really not that expensive. Just you say to somebody, here's a nice little 100,000, and that's it. You're bought. You don't need that many people. You just need people in key strategic positions. And these are people in think tanks, people in the media, you have people in the universities, and and they're pushing a certain line, and it's relatively inexpensive. And Chinese have been doing that, and it's it's very, very smart. And as I say, George Soros, I mean, he has been a very influential figure, even though, when you think of his wealth in comparison with, with some of the big billionaires, isn't that great. I mean, they're also influential, but not quite as influential as Soros. I mean, Soros is just influential everywhere. And how does he do it? Well, he does it by buying people up. He's been buying people up in Europe for years, but he's been doing that in the United States. So you get all these strange prosecutors in the United States. Nobody really knew about those people because you put money into the electing a district attorney. It's relatively inexpensive. I mean, nobody really pays it, or at least nobody used to pay attention to elections to district attorney because, well, who really cares? Soros did it. So Soros said, okay, how many people, what percentage of the electorate actually votes for district attorney, maybe 40% at most. Boom. It doesn't really require that much money to, to pour into a district attorney election. And then you get these odd figures who get elected, like this guy in Milwaukee, or the one who's kind of happy to just let basically a kind of a revolving door. You get arrested, boom, post $500 bail, commit another crime, get arrested, boom, $1,000 bail, and you're gone. So that's, and then you have this guy Garcon in LA, same principle. How do they all get to these positions? Well, because they ran in elections that people didn't pay much attention to, and they got bought and paid for by George Soros. And so you can do it relatively inexpensive. When you think of how expensive most elections in the United States are, so you have to, target offices that that people don't pay very much attention to, but are strategically very important. You can hardly think of a more important job than being the district attorney, and that's what Soros has done, and that's very similar to to what the Chinese have done. I mean, they wield their power and influence not so much by throwing their military weight around, at least not at the moment, but by buying up people. And they organized this. They've been doing this for many years in the United States, and so that's where we are right now. So Brett Harris says, I suspect Browder is only a bag man. He was taught everything by Robert Maxwell, just like Jeffrey Epstein. I know about the Robert Maxwell Jeffrey Epstein connection. I don't know about I don't know about Browder and Robert Maxwell, to be honest. I mean, Maxwell died in 1990, 1991. So I don't know whether there was what links there were between Maxwell and Browder. I don't question it, but I just don't know anything about that. So are there any further questions? Anyone with any other thoughts? So Cabin Fever says Justice Smollett was led off by a Soros DA. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, Justice Smollett, who came up with this nonsensical story that, again, it's interesting, the media ran with it, even though it was laughable on its face. I mean, the whole idea that this was took place something, I think January, I can't remember what year it was, but it was January in Chicago. So his story was that there were some guys hanging around on the street, waiting for him, and then, with MAGA hats, and to beat him up and so on. No one hangs out on the streets in January in Chicago. I mean, that's, you can be attacked, at other times of the year, but you don't hang around for hours waiting for someone to show up in January in Chicago. So it was on the face of it a laughable story. The story, of course, unraveled very quickly. But if you go around making serious accusations and you waste the resources of the police and the district attorney's office and so on, then you are supposed to be prosecuted. I mean, it's like if you you raise a fake fire alarm, you will be prosecuted because you wasted resources of the authorities. So Brett says Browder worked for Maxwell in London in 1990. Okay, I didn't know that. But Robert Maxwell, of course, that's I mean, that's of course a very long story. But he was certainly a very, very shady character, and even his death is a kind of a mysterious as to what happened. He was certainly he linked with all kinds of intelligence services, and again we had the mystery of how he became so wealthy, which is always, I mean, with most other very wealthy people, we know something about how they got to be so rich. But what unites Maxwell with Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, is again, it just remains very murky how they got to be so rich. I mean, you know, the story with Maxwell is that he came across these scientific journals, these very, he somehow acquired the copyright to these articles written by German scientists, and he became very wealthy by selling it. But you know, I never understood how that could have happened. How could he acquire the copyright to these learned articles? But lo and behold, he became very rich, and so it was always a mystery, the origins of his wealth. So you know, I think it's but same with Jeffrey Epstein. You know, no one's ever really been able to explain how it was that Epstein could just become so wealthy. You know, it's like everyone said, well, you know, he had all these clients. Well, who were his clients, and how did he acquire all these clients? So very, very mysterious. So anyway, there's a question from Detroit Rock City. Very, very nice to see you, Detroit. Always good to see friends here. The United States wasted trillions fighting stupid, endless wars. I absolutely agree with you. It was an amazing waste of resources, and it goes back to a question. So you know, why we go on, the public goes on accepting this. I mean, people know that so much money has been thrown away, and yet they keep voting for it. I mean, right now, once again, you know, the gigantic defense budget, you know, going through Congress, you know, no one ever really questions, you know, why you need to spend all this money on the military, who's the enemy, why this would be in any way helpful. But that's one of those things that, you know, it's bipartisan support. And when we talk about this trillions fighting stupid endless wars, you know, hardly anyone really asks these questions. I mean, you know, until it's over. Oh, well, Iraq, yeah, that was a big mistake. That was George W. Bush, Cheney, you know, oh yeah, you know, Judith Miller in the New York Times, yeah, we were misled and so on. Of course, it's all nonsense. You know, nobody was misled about anything. Everyone knew that the intelligence suggesting that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that this was fake, that it was always very dubious. But what mattered is to get the war rolling. And then when the war starts, well, then of course it's too late to withdraw, because if you just withdraw, you know, then you lose. American credibility is on the line. So you know, the key is always to get the war off the ground. Once it's off the ground, once you've launched your invasion, then you can't stop it. So when it's over, or at least America has kind of withdrawn, though America hasn't withdrawn from Iraq, but when America then, you know, withdraws and then it goes back in, you say, well, this was clearly the wrong war. It was Bush, it was Cheney, and so on. But the point is not, you know, refight last year's war, but to be aware of the trillions that are being wasted on current wars. So right now, America is still in Syria. You know, if you ask anyone, I mean, you know, but first of all, much of the public doesn't know that America is in Syria. But even if you were to ask, you know, the public, you know, did you know that it's in Syria? For what end? What's the goal here? You know, no one will be able to explain. So these things just go on forever. Just like this Afghan war went on for 20 years. No one could ever even explain what the hell the United States was doing all that time. I mean, we still don't know. And, you know, and it'd be quite interesting as to what the United States was doing all those years in Afghanistan. You know, what did it spend all that money? I mean, it spent trillions there. Where did that money go? What was it? What leave aside, or what national interest was served by the Americans being in Afghanistan? But you know, but where did it actually go? And that I think is a real is problematic, particularly as I think that we're going to have a giant blowback in the form of massive flow of migrants from Afghanistan, because I think a lot of money were poured into Afghanistan, and now that the money isn't coming in, there's going to be a lot of economic hardship. I mean, people have got used to all that money. The population grew substantially. I saw the other day just the extent of the population growth in Afghanistan during the last 20 years. And I think that's obviously a response to the sudden largesse, the sudden pouring in of American money. But now that's gone. So now that it's gone, we're gonna find that I think it'll trigger anger and frustration and migrant flows and terrorism. That's always the way. All right. Well, I think this has been an interesting conversation, and thank you so much, everybody who joined us. I think thank you for all your comments. Thank you for all the super chats. It's always very interesting, a lot of fun. We will be here same time next Saturday, and we're gonna have another great conversation. So thank you again, and remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Thanks. Bye.